Welcome back to another video. Before we start, I want to take a moment to let you all know you can now become a member of the Horror Hut YouTube channel. I have started a membership option called the Horror Hut Resident, which gives you a badge next to your name when commenting, also some special emojis. This is optional and there is no pressure to join at all, but it's there for anyone that would be interested. If you would like me to add other tiers where you could get access to more perks like exclusive videos, then let me know in the comments. You can still support the channel by subscribing, commenting, sharing and liking the videos. Now, let's get into today's video. The woods were dense and quiet as I ventured deeper into the wilderness, seeking solace and escape from the chaos of everyday life. With nothing but a backpack and a sense of adventure, I set out on a solo camping trip, eager to lose myself in the serenity of nature. As I trekked through the forest, the trees towering overhead and the underbrush thickening with each step, I felt a sense of exhilaration coursing through my veins. There's something about being alone in the wilderness that fills you with a sense of freedom and possibility. But as the hours passed and the sun began to dip below the horizon, I realized that I needed to find a place to set up camp for the night. So I veered off the main trail and followed a narrow path deeper into the woods, hoping to find a suitable spot to pitch my tent. That's when I stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin hidden among the trees, its weathered boards and broken windows standing testament to the passage of time. It was a curious sight, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as I approached. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed open the creaking door, stepping cautiously into the dim interior. The air was thick with dust and decay, and I could feel the weight of years pressing down on me like a physical presence. As I explored the cabin, my footsteps echoing off the bare walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was an irrational fear, I told myself, just the product of an overactive imagination in the quiet of the woods. But then I heard a faint rustling from somewhere deep within the cabin, like the sound of someone moving stealthily through the shadows. My heart pounding in my chest, I called out, my voice echoing off the walls in the eerie silence. There was no response, but the feeling of being watched persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the rustling stopped, leaving me standing alone in the darkness. With a sense of mounting unease, I made my way back to the door, eager to escape the claustrophobic confines of the cabin. But as I reached for the handle, a voice spoke out from behind me, sending a chill down my spine. "Leaving so soon?" it whispered, the words dripping with malice. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the empty expanse of the cabin's interior, shrouded in darkness. Terrified, I stumbled out into the cool night air, my heart racing as I fled into the safety of the woods. But even as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my own campsite, where I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath and shaking with fear. It was only then that I realized the true horror of what had just transpired. I had stumbled upon something in the woods, something ancient and malevolent that had no place in the world of men. But I was safe now, surrounded by the comforting glow of my campfire and the distant sounds of the forest. And as I lay there, trying to calm my racing heart and make sense of what had just happened, I vowed never to venture into those woods again. The forest was dense and alive with the sounds of nature as I set out on my solo hike, seeking solace in the embrace of the trees. With each step, the rhythmic crunch of leaves beneath my boots echoed through the quiet expanse, accompanied by the distant chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the sense of isolation grew, enveloping me like a blanket of silence. It was both exhilarating and unnerving, this feeling of being alone in the wilderness with nothing but the company of nature. But as I trekked along the winding trail, a sense of unease began to creep over me, like a shadow lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that there was someone out there in the woods with me, hidden among the trees. I tried to push the thought from my mind, attributing it to my overactive imagination in the quiet of the forest. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the feeling only grew stronger until it was impossible to ignore. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the feeling vanished, leaving me standing alone in the heart of the forest. I breathed a sigh of relief, chiding myself for letting my imagination run wild. But as I turned to continue on my way, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure, lurking among the trees, watching me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared back at the stranger, unsure of what to do. He was tall and gaunt, with wild eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness of the forest. For a moment, we stood there locked in a silent standoff, neither of us moving as we assessed each other's intentions. And then, without warning, the stranger stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate as he approached me. Panic surged through me as I realized that he was coming closer, that he intended to confront me. I turned and fled, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced through the underbrush, the stranger's footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the main trail, where other hikers passed by without a second glance. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath and shaking with fear as I recounted my harrowing encounter. But even as I caught my breath and tried to calm my racing heart, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. The stranger was still out there, lurking in the shadows of the forest, waiting for his next victim. I knew then that I couldn't stay in the woods any longer, that I needed to get out before it was too late. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed for help, praying that someone would come to my rescue before the stranger found me again. And sure enough, help arrived soon after, in the form of a park ranger who escorted me safely out of the forest and back to civilization. As we drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the dark expanse of trees, wondering what other dangers lurked within their depths. But one thing was for certain: I would never forget the terror of that encounter, the feeling of being hunted by a stranger in the heart of the wilderness. I just had the most terrifying experience of my life, and I need to share it with you all. Last weekend, a group of friends and I decided to go on a camping trip in the woods. We were all excited for some time away from the city, surrounded by nature and good company. Little did we know, things were about to take a terrifying turn. We arrived at the campsite late Friday afternoon and quickly set up our tents. The woods were beautiful, with tall trees and a peaceful atmosphere that seemed to soothe our urban-weary souls. We spent the evening roasting marshmallows over the campfire and sharing stories, enjoying each other's company and the tranquility of the wilderness. But as night fell and we settled into our tents, things started to go awry. We had strayed from the main trail earlier in the day to explore some of the more remote areas of the forest, and now we found ourselves hopelessly lost. Panic set in as we realized we had no idea how to get back to the main trail or where we were in relation to civilization. Tensions rose as we argued about which direction to take and how to find our way back. With each passing hour, the darkness of the forest seemed to close in around us, amplifying our fear and confusion. We tried to stay calm and rational, but it was difficult with the looming sense of uncertainty hanging over us. As the hours stretched into what felt like days, we stumbled through the underbrush, searching desperately for any sign of civilization. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs sent us into a frenzy, convinced that we were being watched by something sinister lurking in the shadows. At one point, we heard a strange sound echoing through the forest, something that sounded like distant laughter. It sent shivers down our spines and fueled our sense of unease, driving us to move faster in our quest to escape the woods. But just when things seemed hopeless, we stumbled upon a familiar landmark that signaled we were close to the main trail. With renewed determination, we pushed forward, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced towards the safety of civilization. And then, finally, we saw it, the trailhead, bathed in the soft light of dawn. We stumbled out of the woods, exhausted and relieved, but grateful to be alive. We collapsed onto the ground, tears of relief streaming down our faces as we realized we had made it out alive. Looking back on that terrifying night, I can't help but feel grateful for the experience. It taught me the importance of staying calm and level-headed in the face of fear, and the strength that comes from relying on the support of friends in times of crisis. So, to anyone planning a camping trip in the woods, I have just one piece of advice: always stay on the main trail and never underestimate the power of nature to humble even the most experienced outdoorsman. So, I'm a photographer, and I have this thing for capturing the beauty of nature in all its rawness. Last weekend, I decided to venture deep into the woods in search of the perfect shot. I packed up my gear, camera, tripod, lenses, and headed out early in the morning. The woods were quiet and still, with the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. It was the perfect setting for a photo shoot. I found a secluded spot near a tranquil stream and began setting up my equipment. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was like someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. I tried to brush off the feeling and focus on my work, but the sense of unease only grew stronger. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I half expected to see someone or something there, watching me with cold, unblinking eyes. As the day wore on, the feeling of being watched became unbearable. I couldn't concentrate on taking photos, my hands trembling as I adjusted the settings on my camera. It was like whatever was out there in the woods with me was closing in, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I packed up my gear in a hurry, my heart pounding in my chest as I hurried back towards the safety of civilization. But no matter how fast I ran, it felt like the presence was right behind me, matching my pace step for step. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, I was out of breath and covered in sweat. I glanced back over my shoulder one last time, half expecting to see something emerge from the shadows, but there was nothing there. Just the empty expanse of the forest, stretching out into the distance. I stumbled out of the woods and collapsed onto the ground, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. It took me a moment to realize that I was safe, that whatever had been watching me in the woods was gone. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. That something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. So, I'm a wildlife researcher, and I've been spending a lot of time out in the woods lately studying animal behavior. Last week, I decided to set up camp deep in the forest, hoping to get a closer look at some of the more elusive species that call this place home. At first, everything seemed normal. I pitched my tent, set up my equipment, and settled in for the night. But as darkness fell and the sounds of the forest grew louder, I began to feel a sense of unease creeping over me. I brushed it off as nerves, attributing my feelings to the unfamiliarity of being alone in the woods at night. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I started noticing strange footprints around my campsite, too large to belong to any animal I knew of. And then there were the sounds, strange rustlings and whispers that seemed to come from all around me, but I couldn't pinpoint their source. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something was off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that there was something out there in the darkness, lurking just beyond the edge of my campsite. I considered packing up and leaving, but I didn't want to abandon my research. Besides, I told myself, whatever was out there probably wouldn't bother me if I stayed in my tent and kept to myself. But as the night wore on, my fear only grew stronger. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, sent shivers down my spine. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. And then, just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, I heard a low, guttural growl coming from somewhere just outside my tent. My blood ran cold as I realized that whatever was out there wasn't just watching me, it was hunting me. I lay frozen in terror, listening as the growls grew louder and closer, until they were right outside my tent. I held my breath, praying that whatever it was would go away and leave me alone. But instead of leaving, the creature outside my tent let out a deafening roar, its sound echoing through the forest like a thunderclap. I knew then that I was in real danger, that whatever was out there meant me harm. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the flap of my tent and bolted into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest as I ran as fast as my legs could carry me. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. I stumbled through the forest, tripping over roots and branches in my blind panic. But I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the woods, where the first light of dawn was just beginning to break through the trees. I collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for breath and covered in sweat and dirt. But as I lay there, shaking and exhausted, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had made it out of the forest alive, away from whatever had been hunting me in the darkness. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling of dread that lingers in the pit of my stomach. I don't know what I encountered out there in the woods, but I know one thing for sure: I never want to go back. I've always been a bit of a survivalist, you know? I love spending time in the great outdoors, testing my skills and pushing myself to the limit. So when I heard about this remote spot deep in the woods, I knew I had to check it out. I packed up my gear and set off into the wilderness, eager to put my training to the test. The first few days were tough, but I relished the challenge, pushing myself to go further and deeper into the woods. But then, one evening as I was setting up camp, I stumbled upon something that sent a chill down my spine. Hidden away in a secluded clearing, I found a makeshift shelter, hastily constructed out of branches and leaves. At first, I thought it was just another survivalist like myself, but then I saw the wanted posters hanging on the walls. My blood ran cold as I realized who I was dealing with, a fugitive on the run from the law. I knew I should report him to the authorities, but something held me back. Maybe it was the thrill of the chase, or maybe it was the fear of what he might do if he found out I had discovered his hiding spot. For days, I wrestled with my conscience, torn between doing what was right and looking out for my own safety. But the longer I hesitated, the more I realized that I was in way over my head. I tried to keep a low profile, avoiding the area where I had found the fugitive shelter and sticking to the shadows whenever I heard footsteps nearby. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then, one night, as I lay awake in my tent, I heard the sound of someone moving through the underbrush. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, straining my ears for any sign of danger. And then I saw him, the fugitive, standing just outside my tent, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. For a moment, we locked eyes, and I could see the desperation and fear written on his face. I knew then that I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Despite the risks, despite the danger, I had to do something to stop him before it was too late. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I leaped out of my tent and confronted him, demanding to know what he was doing there. But instead of running away or attacking me, he just stood there, staring at me with a mixture of defiance and resignation. And then, to my surprise, he began to speak, not in threats or insults, but in words of gratitude and desperation. He told me about how he had been wrongly accused, how he had fled into the woods to escape a fate worse than death. I listened, my heart pounding in my chest as I weighed my options. On the one hand, I knew I should turn him in and let the authorities handle it. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than met the eye. In the end, I made a decision, one that would change both of our lives forever. Instead of turning him in, I offered to help him, to protect him from the dangers lurking in the woods until we could find a way to clear his name. And so, we set off into the wilderness together, two unlikely allies bound together by circumstance and fate. It wasn't easy. There were close calls and near misses, moments when it seemed like all hope was lost. But in the end, we made it out alive, emerging from the wilderness battered and bruised but stronger than ever. And as I look back on our journey, I realized that sometimes the true test of survival isn't just about physical strength or skill. It's about having the courage to do what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. I've always had a thing for mushroom hunting. There's just something about wandering through the quiet, shadowy woods, searching for those elusive fungi that appeals to me. So, when I heard about this secluded spot rumored to be teeming with all kinds of mushrooms, I knew I had to check it out. I set out early in the morning, armed with nothing but a basket and a sense of adventure. The forest was alive with the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves, and I felt a thrill of excitement as I plunged deeper into the woods. After a couple of hours of trudging through the underbrush, I stumbled upon a small clearing tucked away among the trees. At first, I didn't think much of it. But as I stepped into the clearing, something about it gave me pause. The air seemed to grow heavy and still, and a chill ran down my spine as I noticed the strange symbols carved into the trees surrounding the clearing. They looked ancient, almost otherworldly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to find. Curiosity getting the better of me, I ventured further into the clearing, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the ground for any sign of mushrooms. That's when I saw it, a small, weathered box half buried in the dirt. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts telling me to turn back and leave the clearing behind. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself reaching out to open the box. Inside, I found a collection of strange artifacts, ancient-looking knives, rusted chains, and what looked like dried bloodstains smeared across the lid. My stomach churned at the sight, and I quickly slammed the box shut, the sound echoing through the silent woods. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye, a figure lurking in the shadows at the edge of the clearing. My blood ran cold as I realized I wasn't alone. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the figure, trying to make out its features in the dim light. But before I could react, it disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone in the clearing, my mind racing with fear and confusion. With a sense of mounting dread, I turned and fled from the clearing, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the silent forest. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fumbled for the keys. As I drove away from the woods, my mind whirled with questions. Who had left those artifacts in the clearing? And what had happened there to leave such a chilling atmosphere behind? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was for sure, I wouldn't be going back to that clearing anytime soon. I went for my usual morning run, hoping to clear my head and start the day off right. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the deserted streets. As I jogged along, I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration, the cool morning air filling my lungs as I pushed myself to go faster. But then, as I reached the edge of town, I decided to take a shortcut through the woods to save time. It seemed like a good idea at the time, a chance to mix up my routine and explore a different route. Little did I know, it would be a decision that would change my life forever. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the trees closed in around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers to grab at my clothes. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that gnawed at the pit of my stomach, telling myself that I was being silly, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But then I realized I had strayed off the path, the familiar landmarks disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Panic began to rise within me as I realized I was lost, disoriented in a maze of twisted branches and looming shadows. I tried to retrace my steps, to find my way back to the safety of the main trail. But every turn I took seemed to lead me deeper into the heart of the forest, further away from the world I knew and into a nightmare of my own making. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing through the trees, growing louder and closer with each passing moment. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. I knew I had to hide, to find someplace safe until whoever or whatever was out there passed by. With trembling hands, I ducked behind a thick cluster of bushes, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I waited for the danger to pass. But as the footsteps drew nearer, I realized with horror that they were coming directly towards me. I held my breath, praying that whoever it was would just keep walking, that they wouldn't find me cowering in the underbrush. But then I saw them, a pair of shadowy figures moving through the trees, their faces obscured by the dim light of the forest. My blood ran cold as I watched them draw closer, their footsteps growing louder and more menacing with each passing moment. I knew I had to do something, to make a run for it before it was too late. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed myself to my feet and bolted from my hiding spot, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced through the trees with all the speed I could muster. But no matter how fast I ran, they were always right behind me, their footsteps echoing through the forest like a death knell. I could feel their hot breath on my neck, their hands reaching out to grab me with cruel intent. I stumbled and fell, my knees hitting the hard forest floor with a dull thud as I struggled to catch my breath. I glanced around wildly, searching for any sign of escape, but all I could see was darkness stretching out in every direction. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a faint glimmer of light shining through the trees, the promise of salvation beckoning me towards it like a guiding star. With renewed determination, I pushed myself to my feet and raced towards the light, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed for deliverance. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst through the trees and into the clearing beyond, the warm rays of the sun washing over me like a benediction. I collapsed to the ground, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief as I realized that I had escaped the nightmare that had threatened to consume me. As I lay there, gasping for breath and trying to make sense of what had just happened, I vowed never to stray from the path again, to stick to the safety of the familiar world I knew. It was supposed to be a bonding experience, just me and my son out in the wilderness, learning to fend for ourselves and reconnecting with nature. But as we set out on our camping trip, I could never have imagined the nightmare that awaited us in the depths of the forest. We started off strong, my son eager to learn and full of excitement at the prospect of spending time with his old man. We hiked through the woods, set up our campsite, and roasted marshmallows over the crackling fire as the sun dipped below the horizon. But then disaster struck. In the dead of night, a fierce storm descended upon us, tearing through the trees and sending torrents of rain cascading down upon our heads. In the chaos, we lost our way, the trail disappearing beneath our feet as we stumbled blindly through the darkness. Panic set in as we realized we were lost, alone in the wilderness with no way of finding our way back to civilization. But I knew I had to stay strong for my son, to protect him from whatever dangers lurked in the shadows. We pressed on, my heart pounding in my chest as we trudged through the underbrush, the eerie silence of the forest broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the distant rumble of thunder. I kept my son close, my hand tight around his, as we navigated the treacherous terrain. But then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of something moving through the undergrowth, something large and predatory stalking us through the darkness. I knew we were in danger, that we were being hunted by something far more dangerous than any wild animal. I pushed my son behind me, shielding him from whatever horrors lay ahead as we stumbled through the forest, desperate to find a way out. But no matter which direction we turned, we seemed only to get deeper and deeper into the heart of the woods, further away from safety with each passing moment. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a clearing in the forest, a small patch of moonlit ground surrounded by towering trees. It was our only chance, our only hope of escaping whatever nightmare had taken hold of us. I scooped up my son in my arms, his small frame trembling against mine as I sprinted towards the clearing, the sound of our pursuer hot on our heels. But just as we reached the safety of the open space, I felt something grab hold of my ankle, pulling me back into the darkness with a strength that defied belief. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, struggling against the unseen force that sought to drag me down into the depths of the forest. And then, just when it seemed like I couldn't hold on any longer, I felt my son's hand slip into mine, his small fingers intertwining with mine as he pulled me free from the grasp of whatever evil lurked in the shadows. Together, we stumbled out of the forest and into the safety of the open meadow, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon as we collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but alive. We had survived the night, escaped the horrors of the forest, and emerged stronger than ever before. I've always been fascinated by plants. Their intricate designs and unique properties never cease to amaze me. So when I got the chance to venture into the woods to study plant life for my research project, I jumped at the opportunity. Armed with my notebook, camera, and trusty field guide, I set out into the wilderness, eager to uncover the secrets hidden within the forest. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. But then I stumbled upon it, a strange, otherworldly plant unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its leaves were a vibrant shade of purple, its petals shimmering in the sunlight like something out of a fairy tale. I knew I had to study it further, to uncover its secrets and unlock the mysteries of this strange and beautiful specimen. As I knelt down to get a closer look, I felt a sense of unease wash over me, a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. But I brushed it off as nerves, chalking it up to the excitement of discovering something new and unknown. But as I continued to study the plant, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my work, but the feeling only grew stronger with each passing moment. And then, just as I was about to take a sample of the plant for further analysis, I heard the sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush, coming closer and closer with each passing second. I froze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen for any sign of danger. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, a man emerging from the trees, his face obscured by the shadows, his movements slow and deliberate. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before it was too late. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my backpack, searching desperately for my phone. But when I finally found it, I realized with horror that I had no signal, no way of calling for help. Panic set in as I realized I was completely alone, stranded in the woods with no way of contacting the outside world. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before the stranger caught up to me and whatever danger lurked within the forest. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I sprinted through the underbrush, the sound of footsteps echoing in my ears as the stranger gave chase. I didn't know how long I could keep running, how much longer I could evade capture, but I knew I had to try. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I stumbled upon a clearing in the forest, a small patch of sunlight breaking through the trees. I knew I had to make a stand, to confront my pursuer and fight for my life. I turned to face him, my hands trembling as I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. But when he emerged from the shadows, his face contorted with rage, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. He lunged at me, his hands reaching out to grab hold of me, but I fought back with everything I had, lashing out with all my strength as I struggled to break free from his grasp. And then, just when it seemed like all was lost, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps, the unmistakable sound of rescue. I turned to see a group of hikers emerging from the trees, their faces filled with concern as they rushed to my aid. Together, we managed to overpower my attacker, to subdue him long enough for the authorities to arrive and take him into custody. As I sat there, shaking and battered but alive, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the strangers who had come to my rescue, for the kindness of those who had risked their own safety to help a stranger in need. My wife and I decided to escape the hustle and bustle of city life by retreating to a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to reconnect and unwind, away from the stresses of work and everyday life. As we arrived at the cabin, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement mingled with apprehension. The surrounding forest was dense and foreboding, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow up the sunlight. Despite my unease, we unpacked our belongings and settled into the cozy interior of the cabin. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves outside. But as the sun began to set, strange things started happening. Objects seemed to move on their own, disappearing and reappearing in different places. Doors creaked open in the middle of the night, and we heard strange noises echoing through the woods. At first, we tried to brush off the occurrences as figments of our imagination. But as they grew more frequent and unsettling, we began to fear for our safety. One night, as we lay in bed, we heard footsteps outside the cabin, slow and deliberate. My wife clung to me, her breath coming in short, panic gasps as we listened to the sound drawing closer and closer. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I realized that whatever was out there was not human. It moved with an unnatural grace, its footsteps echoing through the silent forest like the approach of a predator stalking its prey. We huddled together in the darkness, our hearts pounding in our chests as the footsteps drew nearer and nearer. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing. And then, without warning, the cabin was filled with a deafening roar, like the sound of 1,000 voices screaming in unison. We bolted from the bed, scrambling to the door as the roar grew louder and louder, threatening to engulf us in its fury. With shaking hands, I flung open the door and we stumbled out into the night, our hearts racing with fear and adrenaline. As we ran through the woods, I could feel something watching us from the shadows, its presence looming over us like a dark cloud. But we didn't stop until we reached the safety of the nearest town, where we collapsed in exhaustion and relief. It took us weeks to recover from the trauma of that night, and even now, the memory of those strange occurrences haunts me. I don't know what we encountered out there in the woods, but I know one thing for sure: I never want to go back. I'm an experienced hunter, been doing it for years. So, when I heard rumors of a rare game species deep in the woods, I couldn't resist the temptation to track it down. Armed with my trusty rifle and a backpack full of supplies, I set out into the dense forest, eager for the thrill of the hunt. At first, everything seemed normal. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and small animals scurrying through the underbrush. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I brushed off the sensation as paranoia, chalking it up to the isolation of the wilderness. But as the hours passed and the feeling persisted, I started to grow uneasy. It wasn't long before I realized that I wasn't alone out there. Something was stalking me, lurking in the shadows just beyond the edge of my vision. I couldn't see it, but I could feel its presence, like a predator sizing up its prey. I tried to push the fear aside and focus on the hunt, but the feeling of being hunted only grew stronger. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sent a shiver down my spine, and I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, searching for any sign of my unseen pursuer. As night fell, the forest grew even more sinister. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, obscuring my vision and making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of me. I knew I needed to find shelter before it got too dark, but every step I took felt like I was walking deeper into a trap. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard a low, guttural growl echoing through the trees. My blood ran cold as I realized that whatever was stalking me was getting closer, its hunger driving it to attack. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest as I sprinted through the forest, desperate to put as much distance between myself and the unseen predator as possible. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was right behind me, its hot breath on my neck. I stumbled over roots and fallen branches, my lungs burning with exertion as I fought to keep moving. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. Sooner or later, I would tire, and then I would be at the mercy of whatever was hunting me. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I spotted a small clearing up ahead. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled energy, I pushed myself to run faster, knowing that safety was within reach. As I reached the clearing, I saw a small cabin nestled among the trees. It was a welcome sight, a beacon of hope in the darkness of the forest. Without hesitation, I dashed towards it, throwing open the door and stumbling inside, panting and exhausted. I slammed the door shut behind me, leaning against it for support as I caught my breath. For a moment, everything was silent, the only sound the pounding of my heart in my ears. But then I heard a low, menacing growl coming from just outside the cabin. My blood turned to ice as I realized that whatever had been hunting me was still out there, waiting for me to let my guard down. I knew I couldn't stay in the cabin forever. Sooner or later, I would have to leave and face whatever was lurking in the darkness outside. But for now, I was safe, and that was all that mattered. I spent the night huddled in the corner of the cabin, my rifle clutched tightly in my hands as I listened to the sounds of the forest outside. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves, sent a shiver down my spine, and I knew that I would never be able to relax until I was safely out of the woods. As dawn broke, I mustered up the courage to leave the safety of the cabin and make my way back to civilization. I kept my rifle close at hand, ready to defend myself if necessary, but thankfully, the forest was silent as I made my way through it. It wasn't until I reached the edge of the woods that I allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief. I had made it out alive, but the memory of that night would haunt me forever. I'm a bit of an outdoors enthusiast, always looking for new adventures and experiences. Last summer, I decided to go foraging for edible plants in the woods near my home. It was something I had done many times before, so I didn't think much of it as I set out into the forest, basket in hand. As I wandered deeper into the woods, I stumbled upon something unexpected, a hidden shrine nestled among the trees. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, surrounded by strange symbols and adorned with offerings of flowers and feathers. Intrigued, I approached the shrine cautiously, my curiosity getting the better of me. I reached out to touch one of the symbols, And that's when it happened. A sudden rush of cold air swept through the clearing, sending a shiver down my spine. I knew then that I had awakened something ancient and malevolent that had been lying dormant for centuries. And as I stood there, frozen in fear, I could feel its presence closing in on me, like a predator stalking its prey. I tried to run, to escape the clutches of whatever dark force I had unleashed, but it was no use. Everywhere I turned, I felt its eyes upon me, watching, waiting, biding its time until it was ready to strike. I stumbled through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to find a way out of the woods. But no matter how fast I ran or how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted, that I was nothing more than prey to whatever lurked in the shadows. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I stumbled upon a clearing in the woods, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. It was like a beacon of light in the darkness, a sign that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for me to escape. I ran towards the clearing, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I raced towards the safety of open space. And as I burst through the trees and into the open air, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But my relief was short-lived, as I soon realized that the danger was far from over. I could still feel the malevolent force lurking in the shadows, watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I knew then that I had to keep moving, to put as much distance between myself and the woods as possible. So I ran, faster and faster, until my legs burned and my lungs ached with exhaustion. And then, finally, just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I stumbled upon the edge of the forest, the safety of civilization just within reach. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath as I looked back at the woods behind me, praying that whatever had been hunting me wouldn't follow. But as I lay there, catching my breath and trying to process what had just happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly terrifying. We were a team of researchers, eager to uncover the truth behind an unsolved mystery that had haunted the local community for years. Armed with our equipment and a determination to get to the bottom of things, we ventured into the woods, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As we trekked deeper into the forest, the air grew thick with tension, a palpable sense of unease hanging over us like a shroud. But we pressed on, driven by our curiosity and the promise of unraveling the secrets hidden within the trees. As the hours passed, we began to notice strange signs, a broken branch here, a trail of footprints, they're all pointing to something sinister lurking in the shadows. But we brushed off our concerns, chalking it up to nerves and the overactive imaginations of a group of researchers on edge. But then we stumbled upon it, a clearing in the woods, eerily silent and devoid of life. And in the center of the clearing, we found what we had been searching for, a makeshift grave, its contents long since decayed and forgotten. As we examined the site, a sense of dread washed over us, a feeling that we were treading on ground that was meant to remain undisturbed. But before we could make sense of what we had found, we heard it, the sound of rustling leaves and snapping twigs coming from the surrounding forest. We turned to see a group of figures emerging from the trees, their faces obscured by the darkness, their intentions unclear. We didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but we knew we had to get out of there, to escape before it was too late. We ran, our hearts pounding in our chests as we sprinted through the underbrush, the sounds of pursuit echoing in our ears. But no matter how fast we ran, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was hunting us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a hidden path leading deeper into the woods. With no other options left, we followed it, hoping against hope that it would lead us to safety. But as we journeyed deeper into the forest, the path grew darker and more treacherous, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. And just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we heard the sound of voices ahead, the unmistakable sound of human laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. We approached cautiously, our hearts pounding in our chests as we braced ourselves for whatever lay ahead. And then, as we emerged into a small clearing, we saw them, a group of locals gathered around a campfire, their faces filled with shock and disbelief at our sudden appearance. We explained our situation, our voices trembling with fear as we recounted our encounter with the mysterious figures in the woods. And to our relief, the locals offered to help us, to guide us back to safety and ensure that we made it out of the forest alive. Together, we made our way back to civilization, our minds reeling with the horrors we had witnessed in the woods. And as we parted ways with the locals, we couldn't help but feel grateful for their kindness and generosity, for saving us from a fate worse than death. But as we returned to our normal lives, the memory of our encounter in the woods lingered, a constant reminder of the dark secrets that lay hidden in the heart of the forest. I've always had a passion for birdwatching. There's something about the tranquility of the forest and the thrill of spotting rare species that has always drawn me in. So when I heard about a remote spot deep in the woods rumored to be a hot spot for elusive birds, I knew I had to check it out. Armed with my binoculars and camping gear, I set out into the wilderness, eager to see what wonders awaited me. As I made my way deeper into the forest, the dense canopy overhead blocked out the sun, casting the woods in an eerie twilight. I found the perfect spot to set up camp, a small clearing nestled among the trees, with a clear view of the surrounding area. I pitched my tent and settled in, ready to spend the next few days observing the avian inhabitants of the forest. But as night fell and the forest grew silent, I began to notice something strange. The birds, which had been so active during the day, were nowhere to be seen. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving behind an eerie stillness that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to shake off my unease, chalking it up to nerves and the unfamiliarity of my surroundings. But as the hours passed and the silence stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And then, just as I was about to turn in for the night, I heard it, the sound of wings flapping overhead, followed by a chorus of unearthly screeches that echoed through the forest. I peered out of my tent, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. What I saw next sent a chill down my spine. A flock of birds, dozens of them, swooped down from the treetops, their eyes glowing in the darkness as they circled above my camp. But these were no ordinary birds. Their feathers shimmered with an otherworldly light, and their cries were unlike anything I had ever heard before. I watched in horror as the birds descended upon my camp, their sharp beaks and talons glinting in the moonlight as they tore through my belongings, searching for something that I couldn't begin to fathom. In a panic, I grabbed my binoculars and scrambled out of the tent, desperate to escape the avian onslaught. But no matter how fast I ran, the birds were always one step ahead, their relentless pursuit driving me deeper into the forest. As I stumbled through the underbrush, my mind raced with thoughts of escape. I knew I had to find shelter, to find some way to outsmart the creatures that were hunting me. But with each passing moment, the forest seemed to close in around me, its twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, blocking my path at every turn. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I stumbled upon a small cave nestled in the side of a hill. With no other options left, I ducked inside, praying that the birds wouldn't follow me into the darkness. For what felt like hours, I crouched in the cave, listening to the sounds of the forest outside. But to my relief, the birds seemed to have lost interest in me, their cries growing fainter as they flew off into the night. Exhausted and shaken, I waited until morning before venturing out of the cave, my eyes scanning the sky for any sign of the creatures that had hunted me. But the forest was silent, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I wasted no time in packing up my camp and getting out of there, eager to put as much distance between myself and the forest as possible. And as I made my way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something truly otherworldly, something that defied explanation. But one thing was certain, I would never look at birds the same way again. I'm an artist, and like many artists, I sometimes find myself in need of inspiration. So, when I hit a creative block a few months ago, I decided to retreat to a secluded cabin in the woods. I thought the peace and quiet would help me focus on my work and hopefully get the creative juices flowing again. The cabin was nestled deep in the heart of the forest, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of nature. It was the perfect place to escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life and immerse myself in my art. At first, everything seemed perfect. I spent my days painting and sketching, losing myself in the beauty of the natural world around me. But as the days went on, I began to notice something strange. I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, fleeting shadows darting among the trees. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me, but as time went on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something lurking just beyond the edge of the forest, something dark and malevolent that was watching my every move. One night, as I sat alone in the cabin, working on a particularly challenging piece, I heard a sound outside, a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen for any sign of movement outside. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but silence, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the growling stopped, leaving me alone in the darkness once more. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal passing through the woods, but deep down, I knew better. There was something out there, something that didn't belong in the forest, and it was watching me. As the days passed, the sense of unease grew stronger, until it felt like I was being suffocated by the weight of it. I couldn't focus on my art, couldn't sleep at night for fear of what might be lurking just beyond the trees. I considered leaving, packing up my things and retreating back to the safety of civilization, but something held me back. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there was connected to my art, that it was somehow drawing me closer to it. And so, against my better judgment, I stayed, determined to confront whatever lurked in the darkness and reclaim my sense of peace. One night, as I sat alone in the cabin, the feeling of being watched grew stronger than ever. I could sense a presence just beyond the edge of the forest, waiting, watching, biding its time. I knew then that I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront whatever was out there and put an end to this nightmare once and for all. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my courage, I ventured out into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest as I crept through the underbrush. As I reached the edge of the forest, I heard the sound of footsteps crunching on the forest floor, growing louder and louder with each passing moment. And then, suddenly, it was there, standing before me in the darkness, a shadowy figure, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. I didn't stop to think, didn't hesitate for even a second. With a scream of terror, I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the forest floor as I raced back to the safety of the cabin. I don't know how long I ran, how far I went before I finally collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath and shaking with fear. But when I finally gathered the courage to look back, the figure was gone, vanished into the darkness like a ghost. I stayed in the cabin for the rest of the night, too terrified to venture back out into the woods. But when morning came, I knew I had to leave, to put as much distance between myself and whatever had been lurking in the darkness. And so, with my heart still racing and my hands shaking, I packed up my things and fled from the cabin, vowing never to return to that cursed place again. It was supposed to be a simple adventure. just a group of college students heading out to explore a remote area of the woods rumored to be haunted. We heard the stories, of course, tales of strange happenings and unexplained disappearances, but we didn't really believe them. We were young and fearless, eager to test our mettle against whatever mysteries the forest held. As we made our way deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew increasingly eerie. The trees seemed to close in around us, casting long shadows that danced in the dim light filtering through the canopy above. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs set our nerves on edge, but we pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the legends. It wasn't long before we began to notice strange things happening around us. Shadows flitted through the trees just out of sight, and eerie whispers seemed to echo on the wind. We tried to laugh it off, chalking it up to our overactive imaginations, but deep down, we knew that something wasn't right. As night fell, the forest took on a whole new level of terror. The darkness seemed to swallow us whole, and we stumbled through the underbrush, our flashlights barely illuminating the path ahead. It felt like we were being watched, like unseen eyes were following our every move. Then, without warning, one of our group disappeared. One moment he was there, walking beside us, and the next he was gone, swallowed up by the darkness. We called out for him, searching frantically through the trees, but there was no sign of him anywhere. Fear gripped us like a vice as we realized that we were not alone in the woods. Whatever was out there, it was dangerous, and it was hunting us. We tried to stick together, to stay close and watch each other's backs, but the forest seemed to conspire against us, leading us in circles and driving us deeper into its dark heart. Hours passed, and still, we found no sign of our missing friend. Desperation gnawed at our insides as we struggled to come to terms with the fact that we might never find him. But just as we were about to give up hope, we stumbled upon a clearing in the woods. At first, it seemed like a sanctuary, a brief respite from the oppressive darkness of the forest. But as we stepped into the clearing, we realized that we had walked straight into the heart of the horror. The ground was littered with strange symbols, and a chill wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. We knew then that we had stumbled upon something truly sinister, something that no amount of bravery could hope to overcome. But despite our fear, we couldn't turn back now. We had to find our friend, no matter what it took. We searched the clearing with growing dread, our flashlights casting long shadows that seemed to dance and twist in the darkness. And then, just when we were about to give up hope, we heard a faint cry for help, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. Without hesitation, we followed the sound, pushing through the underbrush with renewed determination. And then, there he was, our missing friend, battered and bruised but alive. We rushed to his side, pulling him to his feet and helping him to safety. As we made our way out of the woods, our hearts pounding in our chests, we couldn't help but wonder what horrors lurked in the darkness behind us. But one thing was for certain, we would never forget the terror of that night, or the strength of the bonds that had helped us to survive. I've always been fascinated by the idea of geocaching, using GPS coordinates to hunt for hidden treasures in the great outdoors. So when I stumbled upon a new cache in the woods near my house, I couldn't resist the urge to investigate. The cache seemed like any other at first, a small container hidden beneath a pile of rocks, filled with trinkets and a logbook for adventurers to sign. But as I rummaged through the contents, I noticed something odd, a series of cryptic messages scrawled on a piece of paper, along with a set of coordinates leading deeper into the forest. Intrigued, I set out to follow the trail, my curiosity outweighing any sense of caution. As I trekked deeper into the woods, the trees closed in around me, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance in the dappled sunlight. But as I neared the coordinates marked on the paper, I began to feel a sense of unease creeping over me. The messages, once cryptic and harmless, now seemed to take on a darker tone, hinting at secrets best left undiscovered. And then, just as I was about to turn back, I stumbled upon it, a small clearing hidden deep in the heart of the forest, with a crumbling stone altar at its center. Surrounding the altar were strange symbols etched into the ground, their meaning lost to time. As I approached the altar, a chill ran down my spine. This was no ordinary cache, it was something far more sinister. And as I looked closer, I realized that the clues I had followed had led me straight into the heart of a dark and deadly mystery. But before I could react, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I turned to see a group of people emerging from the shadows, their faces hidden beneath hooded robes. Panic surged through me as I realized I was now alone in the woods. These people, cultists, by the looks of them, were here for a reason, and I had stumbled into their midst. With no time to spare, I turned and ran, the sound of their chanting echoing in my ears as I sprinted through the underbrush, desperate to escape their clutches. But the forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees blurring together in a dizzying maze that seemed to lead nowhere. I pushed myself to keep going, my heart pounding in my chest as I fought to stay one step ahead of my pursuers. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I stumbled upon a familiar landmark, a fallen tree that marked the edge of the forest. With a burst of adrenaline, I pushed myself forward, crashing through the underbrush until I burst out into the open air. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath as I looked back at the forest behind me. For a moment, I feared that the cultists would follow me out into the open, but as the minutes passed, it became clear that I was safe for now. I'm a herbalist, and I've always had a fascination with plants and their healing properties. So, when I heard rumors of a rare ingredient hidden deep within the woods, I knew I had to investigate. I packed my supplies and set out into the forest, the dense canopy overhead casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and I felt a sense of excitement building within me as I ventured further into the wilderness. After hours of searching, I stumbled upon a clearing hidden deep within the trees. At first glance, it appeared to be just like any other clearing in the forest, but as I stepped closer, I realized that there was something different about this place. There were strange markings etched into the ground, symbols that I couldn't recognize and that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Curiosity getting the better of me, I approached the markings, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to decipher their meaning. As I studied the symbols, a sense of unease washed over me, as if I had stumbled upon something ancient and powerful, something that should have remained hidden from prying eyes. But despite my misgivings, I couldn't tear myself away from the sight. There was something about it that drew me in, that called to me on a primal level that I couldn't ignore. I began to dig through the underbrush, searching for the rare ingredient that had brought me here in the first place. And that's when I found it, a small, delicate flower nestled among the roots of an ancient oak tree. As I reached out to pluck the flower from the ground, a sudden sense of dread washed over me, as if I had just crossed a line that should never have been crossed. And then, without warning, the ground began to shake beneath my feet, the earth rumbling as if in protest at my intrusion. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched in horror as the symbols on the ground began to glow with an unearthly light. Before I could react, the air around me seemed to shift, as if reality itself was warping and bending in response to the ancient magic that had been unleashed. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shaking stopped, leaving me alone in the clearing, the strange symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake, that I had unwittingly unleashed a power that I couldn't hope to control. But despite my fear, I couldn't bring myself to leave, couldn't tear myself away from the sight of my folly. And so, with a sense of resignation, I sat down among the symbols, my mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. As the hours passed, I felt a strange sense of detachment wash over me, as if I were no longer in control of my own actions. It was as if something was guiding me, leading me down a path that I couldn't hope to understand. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard a voice, a whispering, insistent voice that seemed to echo inside my head. At first, I tried to ignore it, to push it away and pretend that it wasn't real. But as the voice grew louder and more insistent, I knew that I couldn't escape it, that I was being drawn deeper into the darkness with each passing moment. And then, suddenly, it all became clear, the symbols, the ancient magic, the voice in my head. I had stumbled upon an ancient ritual site, a place where the boundaries between the mortal world and the world of the supernatural were thin and fragile. And now, I was trapped in the middle of it, caught in a web of magic and mystery that threatened to consume me whole. But despite the fear and uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm me, I knew that I had to fight back, to find a way to break free from the curse that had ensnared me. With a sense of determination, I stood up and began to chant, my voice ringing out into the darkness as I called upon the ancient powers that lay dormant within the forest. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I felt a sudden shift in the air, a surge of energy that seemed to wash over me like a tidal wave. And then, just like that, it was over. The symbols faded from view, the voice in my head fell silent, and I was left alone in the clearing once more. I stumbled out of the forest, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to process everything that had happened. But despite the terror and uncertainty that still lingered in the back of my mind, I knew that I had emerged from the ordeal stronger than ever before. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. There's something about the unknown that draws me in, so when I got the chance to join a team of paranormal investigators on an expedition to a haunted forest, I jumped at the opportunity. We arrived at the forest just as the sun was beginning to set, the dense canopy overhead casting long shadows across the forest floor. As we unloaded our equipment and set up camp, a sense of unease settled over me, but I pushed aside my doubts and focused on the task at hand. We wasted no time in getting started, setting up our cameras and EVP recorders in strategic locations throughout the forest. As the night wore on, we took turns exploring the woods, searching for any sign of paranormal activity. But as the hours passed and our investigation turned up nothing but eerie sounds and strange shadows, I began to grow increasingly frustrated. It seemed like we were no closer to uncovering the truth than when we had first arrived. And then, just as I was about to suggest calling it a night, something strange happened. One of our cameras picked up a faint whisper, barely audible over the rustling of the leaves. We gathered around the screen, listening intently as the voice grew louder, its words becoming clearer with each passing moment. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before, guttural and otherworldly, like the voice of a creature from the depths of hell itself. And as the words echoed through the forest, a chill ran down my spine, and I knew that we were in way over our heads. But before we could react, the forest erupted into chaos. Shadows darted through the trees, and strange lights danced in the darkness, illuminating twisted shapes that seemed to shift and warp with each passing moment. We scrambled to pack up our equipment, our hearts pounding in our chests as we fought to escape the forest. But no matter how fast we ran, the shadows seemed to follow, their twisted forms closing in around us as we stumbled through the underbrush. I could hear the panicked shouts of my teammates echoing through the trees, their voices filled with fear and desperation. But I dared not look back, knowing that whatever was chasing us was gaining ground with each passing moment. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we burst out of the forest into the open air, gasping for breath as we stumbled into the clearing. We collapsed onto the ground, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief as we looked back at the dark wall of trees that loomed behind us. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we knew that we had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. And as we made our way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled upon something far more terrifying than we had ever imagined. But one thing was for certain, we would never venture into that forest again. I was out in the woods, doing what I always do, chopping down trees for a living. It's hard work, but it puts food on the table. Anyway, I was deep in the forest when I stumbled upon something strange, a bunch of weird devices hidden among the trees. They looked like some kind of traps, but they weren't meant to catch animals. No, these were meant for something bigger. I didn't know what to make of it at first. I mean, who would set up something like that out here in the middle of nowhere? But then it hit me: eco-terrorism. Someone was trying to sabotage the logging operation, and they weren't afraid to get their hands dirty to do it. I knew I had to do something about it. I couldn't just let these eco-terrorists run wild in the woods, putting my livelihood at risk. So, I decided to confront them head-on. I followed the trail of traps, keeping my axe at the ready, until I finally stumbled upon their camp. There were 3 of them, all dressed in black and armed to the teeth. They looked dangerous, but I wasn't about to back down. I demanded to know what they were up to, but they just laughed in my face. They thought they could intimidate me, but they had another thing coming. I stood my ground, refusing to let them scare me off. But then things took a turn for the worse. One of the eco-terrorists pulled out a gun and pointed it straight at my chest. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as he threatened to pull the trigger. I didn't know what to do. I was outnumbered and outgunned, and I knew that if I made one wrong move, it could be the end of me. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard a noise behind me. It was the sound of branches snapping underfoot, followed by the crunch of leaves. I turned around just in time to see another figure emerging from the trees. It was a ranger, armed with a rifle and ready to take on the eco-terrorists. The tables had turned, and now it was the eco-terrorists who were on the run. They tried to make a break for it, but the ranger was too quick for them. He managed to apprehend them before they could get away, and soon they were in handcuffs, being led away to face justice. I couldn't believe it. I had stumbled upon something dangerous in the woods, but thanks to the ranger's timely intervention, I had managed to come out of it alive. I knew that I owed him my life, and I made a mental note to thank him properly once everything had settled down. As for me, I decided to stick to logging for a while. Sure, it's dangerous work, but it's nothing compared to facing off against eco-terrorists in the middle of the woods. I'll leave that kind of excitement to the professionals. I was leading a group of students on an expedition into the wilderness. We were all excited, eager to learn survival skills and experience nature firsthand. Everything seemed fine as we ventured deeper into the forest, but then disaster struck. It started with a sudden change in weather. Dark clouds rolled in, and before we knew it, we were caught in a fierce storm. The wind howled, and rain pounded down on us relentlessly. We tried to find shelter, but the storm was too intense. As the storm raged on, we realized we were lost. Panic began to set in as we struggled to navigate through the thick undergrowth. I tried to reassure the group, but deep down, I was worried. I knew that our situation was becoming increasingly dire. Hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. We were soaked to the bone, cold, and exhausted. I knew we needed to find shelter soon if we were going to survive the night. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, one of the students twisted their ankle. It wasn't a serious injury, but it slowed us down even more. We had to stop and tend to the injured student, further delaying our progress. Despite our best efforts, night fell, and we were still no closer to finding shelter. The darkness was suffocating, and every sound seemed amplified. I could feel fear creeping in, but I knew I had to stay strong for the group. We huddled together for warmth, trying to conserve our energy as best as we could. But as the night wore on, it became increasingly clear that we were in serious trouble. Then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we heard something moving in the darkness. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to see through the darkness. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, disheveled and wild-eyed. He stumbled towards us, mumbling incoherently. I didn't know what to do. Was he a threat? Or was he just another lost soul like us? I cautiously approached the man, trying to assess the situation. He seemed confused and disoriented, but otherwise harmless. I decided to offer him shelter, hoping that he could help us find our way out of the wilderness. We made a crude shelter out of branches and leaves, huddling together for warmth as the storm raged on outside. The man seemed grateful for the shelter, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that we weren't alone anymore. But as the night dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the man. His behavior was erratic, and he kept muttering about strange things. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard not to feel uneasy around him. Then, in the early hours of the morning, the storm finally began to let up. We emerged from our shelter, weary and exhausted, but grateful to have survived the night. As we began to make our way back to civilization, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The wilderness had shown us just how fragile we were, and I knew that our ordeal was far from over. But despite the challenges we faced, we had made it out alive. And as we trudged through the forest, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what we had accomplished. We had faced our fears and emerged stronger for it. I'm a seasoned mountaineer, and I've faced some tough challenges in my time. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on my solo expedition in the snowy woods. I set out on a clear morning, the crisp mountain air filling my lungs as I trudged through the fresh powder. The snow was deep, but I was confident in my skills and eager to tackle the wilderness on my own. As the day wore on, the weather took a turn for the worse. Dark clouds rolled in, blotting out the sun and plunging the forest into a gray twilight. I pushed on, determined to reach my destination before the storm hit. But as the snow began to fall in earnest, I realized that I was in for more than I bargained for. The blizzard descended quickly, the wind whipping through the trees with a ferocity that made it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. I tried to keep my bearings, but the swirling snow disoriented me, and before long, I realized that I was hopelessly lost. Panic set in as I struggled to find my way, my heart pounding in my chest as I fought against the biting cold and the relentless wind. I stumbled through the woods, my boots sinking into the deep snow with each step, my hands numb with cold as I clutched my map and compass. But no matter which way I turned, I couldn't seem to find my way out of the forest. The trees loomed overhead like dark sentinels, their branches twisted and gnarled in the gloom. Hours passed, but it felt like an eternity as I battled against the elements, my energy waning with each passing moment. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I spotted a faint light through the trees. It was a small cabin, nestled in a clearing just ahead. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled toward the cabin, my limbs heavy with exhaustion as I pushed open the door and stumbled inside. The cabin was small and dimly lit, but it offered shelter from the storm, and that was all that mattered. I collapsed onto the floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to warm my frozen limbs by the fire. But as I lay there, trying to regain my strength, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a sense of unease in the air, a feeling of being watched that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to push the feeling aside, telling myself that it was just my imagination running wild in the midst of the storm. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. As the night wore on, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, sent a jolt of fear through me, and I found myself jumping at shadows in the darkness. But despite my fear, I knew that I couldn't stay in the cabin forever. I needed to find my way back to safety, no matter what it took. With a sense of determination, I forced myself to my feet, my muscles protesting with every step as I made my way to the door. But as I reached for the handle, I froze. There was a sound outside, a soft scraping noise that sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, my hand hovering inches from the door as I listened intently. And then, without warning, the scraping stopped, replaced by a deafening silence that seemed to echo through the cabin. For a moment, I stood there, unsure of what to do. But then, with a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the door and stepped outside, ready to face whatever lay beyond. But to my surprise, there was nothing there. The clearing was empty, the storm still raging overhead as I stood alone in the darkness. Confused and more than a little shaken, I retreated back inside the cabin, locking the door behind me as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But despite my best efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that there was something out there in the darkness, waiting for me to let my guard down. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was in more danger than I had ever imagined. And as the storm raged on outside, I knew that I would have to summon every ounce of courage and determination to make it out of the woods alive. As I huddled inside the cabin, the storm raged on outside, the wind howling like a pack of wolves and the snow piling up against the windows. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, but the thought of venturing out into the darkness filled me with dread. I tried to keep myself busy, stoking the fire and rationing what little food I had left. But every creak of the floorboards made my heart skip a beat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the walls, waiting for me to make a move. Hours passed, the darkness outside seemingly impenetrable as I waited for the storm to pass. But as the night dragged on, I realized that I couldn't stay cooped up in the cabin forever. With a deep breath, I made the decision to venture out into the cold, hoping against hope that I could find my way back to safety. Bracing myself against the biting wind, I stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath my boots as I trudged through the deep drifts. For hours, I stumbled through the forest, my hands numb with cold as I clutched my map and compass, praying for a glimpse of familiar landmarks. But as the storm raged on, it became increasingly clear that I was hopelessly lost. The trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, their branches laden with snow as they swayed in the wind. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I spotted a faint light through the trees. It was a beacon of hope in the darkness, and I stumbled toward it with renewed determination. As I drew closer, I realized that it was a cabin, much like the one I had sought shelter in earlier. But this one seemed different somehow, more inviting, and I felt a surge of relief flood through me as I approached the door. I knocked tentatively, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for a response. And then, to my surprise, the door swung open, revealing a warm, welcoming glow from within. Relief flooded through me as I stepped inside, the warmth of the fire washing over me like a wave. The cabin was small but cozy, and I collapsed onto the floor, overcome with exhaustion as I allowed myself to relax for the first time in what felt like an eternity. As I lay there, basking in the warmth of the fire, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the stroke of luck that had led me here.